Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffman coming at you with another 8-Push video. We're continuing our look at topic 2.3, the regions of British colonies. Now previously we talked about the formation of Chesapeake region colonies like Virginia and Maryland. We've already hit New England as well. Today we're going to introduce the remaining colonies that are going to be mostly emerging in the latter half of the 17th century. And we tend to collectively call these remaining half of colonies approximately the Restoration colonies. And the reason why we call these the Restoration colonies is because these were formed following the end of the Civil War, the English Civil War, that saw the return of, or the restoration of, the monarchy to control of England. So, with that being said, taking a look here at our big map of the British colonies in the 17th century, or in the beginning of the 18th century, we're going to first start off by taking a look at some areas south of the Chesapeake. Now, note, as I've said before, depending on who you talk to, you might consider the Chesapeake, like Maryland, Virginia, their own kind of region, but if you did it first, you would then kind of have to admit that over time, you would probably be lumping in Maryland, Virginia with the rest of the southern colonies proper. And we're going to first take a look down here at what many are going to view as kind of the jewel of the southern colonies, here in America, and that's going to be South Carolina. Now, South Carolina is going to become a very wealthy, powerful colony during the late 17th and early 18th centuries, and a lot of it is going to be centered around their cash crop. Where Virginia has tobacco, South Carolina has rice. Now, it's going to have some other things like indigo, for example. But rice is really going to be the major crop of that colony. And, like many of these other, crops that we're going to be seeing cultivated, rice requires a lot of land for cultivation for profitability. And you're going to see in South Carolina, just like we saw mimicked in Virginia, the creation of big, large plantations. Plantations that are going to be owned by the uber wealthy of the colony, and worked upon by African slaves, which were now coming over by the thousands upon thousands as we're going through the 17th century. We'll spend a lot more time talking about the institution of colonial slavery later on in this unit. But just suffice to say, what you're seeing in South Carolina, in many respects, is going to mimic what's happening in Virginia. The idea being is that you're going to have this very small uber elite of super wealthy and super powerful political figures, and then everybody else is going to be pretty poor, and that's amongst white people. And then below that, chattel slaves. So you're going to be seeing a very, very clear hierarchical system emerging in South Carolina. Now, when we look at the map here, you've got Virginia up here, you got South Carolina down here, and these were two established colonies, but there was kind of this kind of nether region, if you will, between the two colonies. And as we said before, one of the things that begins to be noticeable is that there's a growing number of white landless folks in Virginia and a growing number of white landless folks in South Carolina. Well, what do you do if you can't legally have land where you're living? Well, you move to somewhere else where there aren't quite laws established on land, and that's going to be this area in between Virginia and South Carolina, which is going to be eventually called North Carolina. North Carolina is going to have far more inauspicious origins. It's going to have a lot of folks that are just going to be squatting on the land there, in terms of folks that are going to be initially settling it. And because of that, you're not going to see, at least initially, the formation of these big, giant plantations that will dominate, Virginia and South Carolina. Smaller, mid-size farms. There's going to be more of a little bit more equity, socially, economically, amongst those residents. We'll see a blend of different types of crops. I mean, you'll see a little bit of rice and indigo, but also a substantial amount of tobacco, for sure. And note, because, North Carolina has more of a working class origin, you're going to see not just African slaves serving as the labor source, you're also going to be seeing, a decent number of white indentured servants as well. So the idea of unfree labor is not necessarily going to be associated with skin color just yet in North Carolina. All right, now we will get to Georgia, but we're going to end with Georgia in this video, so just keep that in mind. What we're going to do now is we're going to move up north a little bit. We're going to head up to the middle colonies, as you can see here, labeled or pictured, colored here in green. Basically, hence the term middle colonies, because they are, southwest of New England, and they are north of the southern colonies, stretching from New York all the way down to Delaware. So let's take a look at some of these colonies. Now, one of the things you want to kind of keep in mind if you're kind of looking at this region collectively is that if you're looking at it from kind of a political, social standpoint, this is definitely the most liberal of the three regions in terms of the idea of religious tolerance. It is going to be certainly the most racially and ethnically diverse part of the middle colonies. You're going to be seeing folks coming from not just England, but you're seeing a lot of folks going to be coming from Germany and Scotland, and some from Ireland initially, and other folks like that. There's going to be Swedes, there's going to be Dutch, there's going to be all sorts of folks that are going to be there. But centering first on New York, this is going to become kind of one of the early powerful middle colonies. We've already mentioned before, New York was initially settled by the Dutch, but in 1664, English forces will surround and take over Dutch territory, specifically around New Amsterdam, renaming the city New York as it still exists today. But still, for many, many, many decades and generations, we're going to be seeing New York mostly be made up of ethnic Dutch residents. I mean, if you've ever heard the Roosevelt family, the Roosevelts trace their family lineage all the way to Dutch settlers during the 17th century. So you can see, the lineage there. New York City is going to be a major commercial hub for shipping amongst the colonies. It's kind of a halfway point, so to speak, but also in terms of transatlantic trade. Many of these middle colonies collectively are going to have some degree of a representative government. This is important because the more of these colonies that have representative governments, you're going to have more of this practice in self-governing. That is going to be very significant in terms of a century later when we're talking about, forming our own independent government. To the south of New York, you've got, golly, keep hitting that wrong tab. You have got New Jersey and Delaware. Delaware is going to have a pretty noticeable Swedish ethnic population there, at least initially. New Jersey is going to be a crown colony. But the other major middle colony I wanted to focus in on was Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is going to be founded by this gentleman right here, William Penn. And if you think he looks like someone familiar, he kind of does look like the guy on the box of Quaker Oats, because William Penn was a Quaker. So who were the Quakers? Well, the Quakers were a very small religious sect that was formed in England and was seen as, well, in a positive sense, quirky, in a much more antagonistic sense, as threatening to the status quo of the Anglican Church. The term Quaker is associated with this group. The actual name of this group is the Society of Friends, which kind of gives you a sense of a real sense of egalitarianism within this denomination. And you can see there isn't really much of a hierarchy. Like, you don't have strong bishops and priests and folks like that. But anyhow, the term Quaker is associated with this group because they will say that they are, trembling with the Spirit of the Lord, to the extent that you are quaking physically. Now, these folks are going to be, not totally cool in English Anglican society. And so any way to kind of dilute the number of Quakers in England, the Crown's going to take advantage of. And that includes paying off a debt to William Penn the Quaker by giving him this land, which will eventually be called Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania then is going to be the hub of quite a few Quaker communities out there. Still to this day has a strong Quaker heritage. But the Quakers are going to be an extremely liberal, relative to the time, religious sect. With this, once again, if you're talking about a strong sense of egalitarianism, a society of friends, as they call themselves, well, it's going to be of this idea that, if you believe in God in any way you think of God, you are a brother, you are a friend, And so Pennsylvania is going to be an extremely tolerant, liberal society, welcoming of all religious denominations, putting into legislation initially rules about fair trade with the natives, the sense that natives are to be treated equally, not just legally, but socially in society. This is unbelievably liberal for the time. If you were going to try to compare it to something today, Philadelphia was the San Francisco of the colonial era. It was extremely, extremely liberal. So, you've got, once again, as we're looking at these different individual colonies, certainly different values are standing out in terms of the role of religion, the role of money, things like that. Very, very significant. Now, to round out our tour of the remaining Restoration colonies, we're going to go all the way down to our southern, most southern of the 13 colonies, and that's down here in Georgia. Now, Georgia is going to have an interesting origin story, and it starts with this dude right here. This is James Oglethorpe. Oglethorpe is going to be the first governor of Georgia, and unlike places like, Virginia and South Carolina, which were clearly set up as places for, financial opportunity, or places like Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Pennsylvania that certainly had, religious values as a strong influence for what's going to be driving the creation of that colony, Georgia is going to be something pretty unique. In Georgia, it is focusing in on what England considered to be a social problem, and that was, debtors. England had, in those days, laws against indebtedness, and so if you didn't have money to pay your debts, you could be thrown in jail. And during these times, there were quite a few poor folks that were in debtors' prisons. Now, England viewed these folks as a drain, not only socially, but a drain financially to the government. So the thought was, where can we send these people that are a drain? Well, send them out to the Americas. And that's where Georgia comes in. Georgia is going to be a very nice buffer colony from Spain down here. If you keep going down a little bit further, you're going to hit Spanish Florida and all of these English colonies along the Atlantic coast. So if you create Georgia and you fill it with, debtors who English society is going to view as, kind of the bottom feeders of society, if the natives decide to get cute and try to invade from the south, well, they're going to have to go through Georgia first. And if those folks get killed, and kind of deter and slow down an invasion, so be it. These are, the general thought was these folks are not the best of gentlemen anyway. So that's kind of where this comes from. Very, very interesting. And notes, because there's going to be such a poor white population there, slavery is going to take a long time to get established. But note also, because of, its kind of reputation as, the haven for, the low class of society, it's not going to grow very fast. It's going to be seen as a very dangerous, least safe of the colonies initially, the ones that would be most prone to an invasion. So it's gonna take a long time to develop in any type of real sustainable population. But when it does get going, it will revert and look very similar to the other colonies of that region. So it will become, plantation-based. It will eventually, over time, become African slave-based in terms of a labor supply. So Georgia, by the time we get to the Revolution, in many respects is like every other Southern colony, but its origin story is quite unique, quite different. So anyhow, we're going to go ahead and leave it there for this video. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.